All right. It's as we continue our Drive to Survive series, we're starting with, we did episodes 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we're on to number 6, which was all about McLaren and how they handled their driver situations, the mistakes they made, and the view of McLaren from the paddock and the pressure put on Zak Brown. And we saw Zak Brown. We're going to talk about all stuff McLaren. That's why we busted out the vintage McLaren Golf helmet. Well, it's not McLaren's, it's a racing helmet actually, but it's the vintage Golf like that. I picked that up in Monaco. I think that was 2018, maybe 2019. Awesome. And then I got my Golf. Look, check the merch. Got my Golf McLaren, which was, in my opinion, the best livery ever. I don't know why there's not a team running it right now. That livery should run from today till time immemorial. That livery should be on one car on the. It should be mandatory. Mandatory that livery lives on forever and ever. And I know one of the MotoGP teams is running the Golf livery. It just makes everything look so great and awesome. But enough with the segue. We're going to talk about McLaren in episode 6 of season 7 of Drive to Survive. Here,
America F1, America F1, it's a golden run. America F1.
Great Tuesday, and I hope you're having a great Tuesday out there in the world, in the land of F1. Here at America F1, we're going to review Drive to Survive Season 7, Episode 6, and our weekly, everyday, putting out a podcast talking about Drive to Survive leading up to the Australian Grand Prix this weekend, which we all can't wait for. And Mike's going to be in later in the week, and we're going to do a preview of the Australian Grand Prix. Now let's look at last year and talk about what is this episode. It's all about McLaren. And as we know, if we go back to the 2024 season, let's look right here. Max Verstappen obviously won with 437 points. This is the driver's standings. Lando Norris finished second with 374. And then we have Oscar Piastri at 292 finishing in 4th. And then you have to go all the way down to 8th with Sergio Perez scoring 152 points. Now, we all know that the only reason that McLaren won the Constructors' title, the first title since 1998. That's right, you heard me. 1998, and I think it was Coulthard. Let's go and see. Let's take a look. Let's scroll back to 1998. And as we scroll back, McLaren won the Constructors with 156 points over Ferrari, who had 133 points. And who was on that team at the time? I think it was Coulthard, just off the top of my head. Let's see. I'm pretty sure it was Coulthard and Mika Hakkinen. Okay. Yeah, David Coulthard and Mika Hakkinen. Oh, not bad with a little memory. I got it. So let's go back to 2024, and then let's go to the teams. And McLaren won the Constructors' title, 666 points. Ooh, I don't know if can we say 666? Can we? 666 points. Ferrari had 652 points. Pretty close. And Red Bull was down at 589. All right, now let's close this out. so it won't be a distraction. I mean, we might need it for something later, but let's. But here it is. The episode starts out with Zak Brown. And Zak Brown is the CEO of Mclaren Racing, okay? So he not only does he go to the races of Formula One, he goes to IndyCar. He also goes to all of the other races that McLaren is a part of, and they're in the WC, they're in, which is the World Endurance Championship. They're everywhere. They're in sports cars. They're in GT racing. I mean, McLaren is a big name in racing, always, and has been for such a long time. It's one of the iconic brands of Formula One. But in this episode, they talk about Zak Brown. They talk about Lando Norris. We don't get that big into Oscar Piastri and his background. We don't see, there's no Mark Webber walking around and talking about how great Oscar is, and to watch out for all the things that happened to him that when he was teaming up with Vettel at Red Bull, and I think some of that dynamic of you don't want to be the number 2 driver. And you never do. You always want to be the lead driver in everything, right? You want to be the lead, but sometimes your talent is just not there. And let's be honest, Lando was faster last year. More podiums. He qualified higher. He had more points, obviously. And they have an episode where, let's take you back to Monza, okay? And Lando Norris is leading going into that first corner. And Oscar Piastri sneaks in and cuts, right over that chicane, and comes out. And Lando has to correct because Oscar cuts it in there. And I don't actually know how 2 cars got through that part, because it went like this. Oscar's on the inside, Lando's on the outside. And to get that out of that corner, Oscar kind of had to cut it and then push to make the corner right, which pushed Lando over, which messed up his line. And then Charles Leclerc ended up passing Lando. And so Lando went from being first to being third. And you could see the look like they cut right to the garage. In the garage, you see people cursing and going like, why did he do that? Like, no one expected that. No one expected him to make that corner and to make a pass and come that close to his teammate. It ended up in that episode. But in real life, what ended up happening is that they pitted Oscar. Oscar was leading the race, and he should have won the race. In all reality, that race should have been Lando Norris number 1, Oscar number 2, Charles Leclerc number 3. Because Monza, there's only a couple areas to pass there. It's a pretty tough area to pass, actually. One of the harder tracks. It's older. It's one of the harder tracks to pass at. But there are areas to pass. But it usually takes lap after lap after lap, and then you finally get them. And it's usually on that second back straightaway, because when I was there 2 years ago, that's pretty much where all the passing happened, on that second straightaway. That's where, they lap, get close, they'd be right behind, and then all of a sudden they make it. So nobody was expecting that pass from Piastri, not even Lando, because he even says, if I knew that he was going to do something like that right there, then he would have never been able to do it. Basically meaning he would have covered him off, but he didn't expect it. The team didn't expect it. But that goes to show, and Oscar, they, give a second of an interview with him, and he goes, well, we don't have any team orders about that. There's nothing saying that you have to lead into the first corner. If I saw opening, I took it, and, we don't have anything in the contract saying that, we're racing. Good for him. But then later, you see a scene, all the other principals are like, well, they need to have a lead driver because that costs them a lot of points. And, and then you see one of the managing directors talking to Zak Brown saying, hey, I don't want to put any more pressure on you. And I know you guys are doing really well. No one expected this. No one expected this, right? Because Red Bull had been dominating the beginning of the season. It was Max and Checo 1-2s, as you remember. And Max had won like six of the first 8 races, something like that. So it looked like another dominating Red Bull season. But out of nowhere, mid-season, McLaren just started coming on. And then Red Bull fell off. It wasn't really Max falling off. It was Checo's performance. And there's a scene in this episode where they go to Azerbaijan, Baku. And Checo has won more Baku, Azerbaijan races than any other Formula One driver. Okay, so he's like the king of Baku. And, some of the drivers were making a reference for how good Checo is there, and they interview him. And, you could see he had a lot of confidence, right? But the driving errors continued in that race. He took out Carlos Sainz, okay, trying to make, it was a very clumsy, Checo made some very, very clumsy passes last year. And I guess they weren't even passes because he would crash out, so you can't really say it's passes, can you really say it's passes? No, not really. But his form really fell off last year, and everybody was waiting for him to return to the old form of Checo, the Minister of Defense, and it never returned. It never did. And they had to eventually let him go. But they didn't show Carlos Slim all the behind-the-scenes things. With people were spreading the rumor and saying that, well, the reason why they're not switching is because Telemex made an infusion of money to Red Bull. And so basically, if they even didn't win the Constructors' Championship, just keeping Checo, that they were going to compensate them. That was the inference and the rumors that were out there. Because why else wouldn't Red Bull, who's ruthless with cutting people and changing, why else wouldn't they get rid of Checo? Because he was in bad form. And then some people were saying, well, they can't get rid of him before the Mexican Grand Prix because pretty much all the fans come to see Checo, right? I mean, it's in Mexico. You don't want to cut the guy before his home race. And I'm sure the sponsors and all the people involved with the Mexican Grand Prix came out and said, hey, no way, don't. There's no way you can do that. You're going to cost us too much money. Okay. Did Checo, he also complained that the car was totally different and the car was bad. And it ended up at the end of the season, Max even alluding to some of the things that Checo had been saying all season, that he was right, except Max, being a better driver, could handle it more because the car is, pretty much manufactured to Max's driving style. And Checo just has to live with it, and they do the best they can on his side of the garage. And Liam Lawson will find that out this year, that the car, hopefully, if he can adapt to that driving style of the car. But if not, oh well, because Mike likes a pointy car, and the car's really pointy. So now they go to this one scene, and all the all the principals are saying that Zak Brown needs to get a hold of this team, and the buck stops with there's a scene where Zak's well, the buck stops with me, and they show his masculinity because he's out there in Florida at spring training doing batting practice because he always wanted to play baseball. So you see him taking whiffs and then getting a base hit and then running the bases. And I'm surprised that he didn't pull a hamstring or something like that, how he was getting around those bases. He wasn't running that fast. They also show him barbecuing with one of his friends. See the masculinity that goes into that? See how they form that? He's playing baseball as a sportsman. Because, how he tells a story about how he bought his first go-kart. And he bought his first go-kart. He was on Wheel of Fortune. And he won Wheel of Fortune, won some money. And he took that money to get his first go-karting, and he says, I'm probably the only guy on the grid that bought his first go-kart off of a game show, and I'm pretty sure he is. I mean, who else has gone on a game show and won money? Anyhow, they got Oscar Piastri in the room. They got Lando in the room. And before they get to that, they go back to Hungary, right? And in Hungary, as you all remember, if you can remember the Hungarian Grand Prix, that's the one where they pitted Oscar Piastri when they shouldn't have. Because all last year, their strategy wasn't the greatest. McLaren's strategy for half the season, almost 3/4 of the season, even us on every podcast, we complain about McLaren's strategy. Like, what are they doing? Why are they throwing away all these race wins? And you also got to remember that Lando kept being on pole and then losing it by the first corner. By the first corner, he'd go from pole, he'd be in second or third, and it kept coming up. It kept coming up, and he kept saying, I'm having bad starts, and I got to work on having bad. And it was to the point where there was memes out there just saying, first corner Lando, he'll be on pole, and then by the first corner, he'll be in third place. And it kept happening again and again. So there was all these questions over Lando's driving ability. There was all these questions over, can Zak Brown and Andre Stella manage these two alphas? Can they manage two number one drivers? And to win the constructor's title, you have to have two strong drivers. But there comes a time when whoever's ahead has to be the one that has the priority. The other driver has to support that driver. Otherwise, you could keep taking points away from each other, and it's going to cost you races, because by doing that and battling amongst teammates, then that leads the other cars to be able to have the opportunity to pass you, right? Because you're ruining your tires fighting each other, and that brings up opportunities for everyone else. Not only that, you just can't have that dynamic when you're trying to win. There has to be a number one driver, and it has to be another driver that supports him. Now, how you get that when you have two number one drivers? Well, it's pretty simple. Who's ever in the lead by this date, that's who's going to be the one, if they have a chance. And there was a chance for a bleeding moment that Lando could win the Drivers' Championship. There was. But they threw it all away because they didn't recognize early enough. I mean, look, they barely beat Ferrari for the Constructors' title by the seat of their pants. Now, if they would have recognized earlier that we need to support Lando, maybe it would have been a runaway title. Maybe Lando would have come closer to winning his first title. Maybe. Probably not, just because Max had such a great start to the season. I digressed a little bit. Let me go back to the Hungarian ring and what happened in this episode. So they pitted Oscar because he complained about his tire, but they should have waited. Lando stayed out, and then when Oscar came out, Lando was ahead. And after a couple laps, because Oscar had good pace, but he just never could catch up, they asked Lando, hey, let's change positions. Let's reverse the cars, And Lando at first act like he didn't even hear him, which is probably the normal response when someone asks that. You just don't respond. I'm not saying anything. And then they asked him again, and then you can see the worry. They cut to the worry on their face, like, Lando, do the right thing. Lando, I know you're going to do the right thing. Like, Lando, this is the team order. You have to, And he's like, well, okay, well, let him catch up to me then. And so what Lando proceeds to do is put in fastest lap after fastest lap after fastest lap, just to prove a point. And then they come back on the PA and go, Lando, okay, you've proved your point. All right, but you're going to need Oscar. You're going to need Oscar in this championship. Let Oscar by, please. And finally, Lando lets him by. And there's, you could see they cut to the cool down room, which used to be called the Max Verstappen podcast because he was there so much. That's what they call that room, the Max Verstappen podcast room. But they go to the cool down room, and you could see the tension. You know, you could see Lando was pissed. He was just sitting there. Oscar comes in, and usually with teammates, hey, what's up? Hey, how you doing? Hey, what'd you do on that turn? Oh, hey, how was your pace? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, on this one corner, I had this problem. Oh, I had that same problem. Blah, 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 blah. So they have, a little banner. Nothing. Pure silence. No noise. No noise at all. So the tension was thick. Lando was pissed. Oscar was uncomfortable. And that was his first win. Remember, that was the Hungarian. That was his first win in F1. And do you want to win a race that way? It wasn't Lando's fault. It was the team's fault. They screwed up. Lando didn't mess up. And then they cut to Christian Horner, and he goes, "Can you imagine Max giving that back?" And they all started laughing because we all know Max would have just been like, "Too bad, too bad. I'm standing by it. I told you before. Don't ask me that." That's what he would have done, right? Okay, he would have. It'd have been glorious. It would have been glorious. So they cut to the room. And this is after the Hungarian ring, and this is after they were in Monza, and they're in the room, and they're holding this paper, like they have to sign something, or they're reading something. Zak Brown's still in Florida, and they have Andrea Stella leading the meeting, and he's saying, well, the cars came too close, and this can't happen. This can't happen again. So what we're going to do is we're going to go with the guy with more experience. We're going to go with the guy leading between the teammates, and we're going to prioritize Lando. And then they cut to Oscar, and he's dejected, but he understands. He's like, yeah, well, I understand. There's nothing I can do. And then they cut to Will Buxton. He's like, Zak Brown has to lay down the law, and you guys drive for me, and he's alluding to, like, I guess, how principals of the past have handled it. And Zak Brown kind of stayed out of it. I'm sure he, behind the scenes, told Andrea Stella what he wanted, and let Andrea Stella, as the team principal, do it. And it's a confusing thing, because when you think about it, Zak Brown's the CEO, but they highlighted him in this episode, not really Andrea Stella. And I don't know if it's because his English is not that great. He has a huge, heavy accent, and maybe they didn't want to portray that. I don't know. But typically, it's the principal that they're, following and talking to. But in this case, it's Zak Brown. So that's a little strange, right? I mean, don't you think that tad bit strange? But I mean, Zak is the more charismatic, gregarious person. I mean, he is the CEO, but he's not the principal. And so they don't really get into that dynamic. And for me, as a Formula One podcaster and fan, that would have been interesting. I would have wanted to see what that dynamic is like. Like, when Zak's in the room, is he the one taking the lead? Most of the times when I see him in the debrief, and they all have their headsets on, he doesn't even have his microphone so he can talk. He has it turned up, and he's just there listening. And Andrea Stella and the drivers are talking, and the engineers. And I think Zak just listens, and then maybe afterwards he'll talk to Andrea Stella, or he'll talk to one of the drivers individually. But he doesn't seem, so far from what I've seen, I don't know because I wasn't there and you're not there, but he doesn't seem to get into the weeds like that. He just wants to know what's going on, and then we'll talk about it later. So they prioritize Lando. Obviously, they win the Constructors' title. They don't show that. They don't show them winning the Constructors' title and holding up the trophies. I'm sure they're going to show that later. But episode 6, my review, out of 1 to 10, I'm going to give it... Is it the best episode so far? No. The best episode so far was episode 5, which was Charles Leclerc, and then episode 2, which was dealing with Lando Norris. So far, those two are the best episodes. Out of the 6 episodes, this would be, I would say, the second. I'm going to go with, this is better than the Carlos Sainz episode. So this is number 3 so far. So out of 6 episodes so far, this is ranking 3. Is it one to watch? If you've never seen Drivers to Survive before, then you're watching the whole season. But if you're just picking out episodes that are interesting, I would go with the Lando Norris episode, episode 2, and the Charles Leclerc episode, La Paris de Monaco, or Leclerc, episode 5. Episode 6, if you're a super McLaren fan and you love Zak Brown and you want to see everything McLaren, then I guess it's a good episode. I wasn't really compelled by it. The cinematography, usually I always talk about cinematography, and you know that. It wasn't one of the better cinematic episodes that they've had so far. It was aight. It wasn't that great. It was okay. But tune in for tomorrow. We're going to review another episode 7. And thank you for tuning in. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification as we continue. And we're moving on toward the Australian Grand Prix to start out the season this week. So keep on racing, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story. And I need all of you to stop what you're doing